Extra, extra. Creators speak, audiences react, data illuminates. The content conversation of the future is here. What if I told you that creativity isn't a monologue, but a data-driven conversation with your audience? Today, we're exploring how the future of creative operations is already here, revolutionizing the way we think about and produce content. Meet John Pagano, who leads editorial operations at Nickelodeon's digital studios. John has masterfully built a high-performing team that's redefining creative possibilities. His secret? Embracing data, not just to measure success, but to fuel and guide the creative process itself. In this episode, we'll dive into how John and his team use data to engage in an ongoing dialogue with their audience, informing every creative decision and measuring real-world impact. You'll discover how to balance creativity and technology, adapt to the ever-changing landscape of content creation, and prepare your team for an AI-driven future, all while keeping your audience at the heart of your creative process. Whether you're a veteran in creative operations or just starting out, this conversation is brimming with actionable insights and forward-thinking strategies, from fostering a data-informed creative culture to reskilling talent for tomorrow's challenges. John offers a roadmap for elevating your team to new heights. So get ready to challenge your assumptions and imagine new possibilities. Strap into that DeLorean as we jump into the future with John Pagano. John, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast. So glad that you could join us today. And I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you since I've heard you speak at the Henry Stewart Conference. And we're going to touch on really what piqued my curiosity there in terms of what we're presenting. But before we get to that, like we start off every episode of the Creative Ops Podcast, I'd love to hear from you. What's your definition of creative operations? And as an add-on to that, how do you define success in creative operations? I guess more bluntly, what separates high-performing teams from those that aren't as high-performing?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It was great meeting you at the Henry Stewart Conference. And honestly, this is something that I always change the definition of in my mind, what creative operations is. And it's hard because your brain goes in a million different directions trying to put it into pill form. But in my experience, it's been creating successful and repeatable formats of operation, but leaving room for creativity and improvisation. And in my mind, what separates a successful creative operations team from the opposite are those who fail to adapt, those who are so stuck in the mud that they have to do one thing one way. In my mind, you constantly have to be a chameleon and adapt to what the technology is, what the environment is, and also to what your present state of your team is as well. So for me, it's a constant form of adaptation.
So when you're talking about adaptation, are you referring to the creative side of the equation or the operation side of the equation, or both?
You see, this is why I'm kind of a funny cat that you're talking to, because I started off as a purely creative guy. I was in writing and branding for many years, was one of the leaders of our digital department, and we were creating what I thought is a vacuum, right? What ideas we thought were cool. But as I further moved along, I kind of view creative and creative operations as kind of collapsing together, right? So adaptation, going back to my earlier point, is adapting to what your audience wants in terms of creativity. What are the formats and the narratives that are really driving them? But with a department like ours, where we primarily service Nickelodeon's biggest IP YouTube channels, we have to take that creativity that's constantly changing and build systematic formats so that we can generate a ton of content, so that it allows us to meet that volume, but at the same time, still really hone in on great creativity.
So if I can parrot that back to you and let me know if I didn't hear this correctly, it's about constantly listening to the audience in terms of what they're reacting to, not reacting to, and adapting how that creativity is getting packaged up so it resonates with or lands with the audience and it gets them to do what you're hoping they do. They watch something, they click on something. And in surface of that, it's adapting how that creativity happens.
100%. Yeah, to your point, it really goes back to the audience and viewer experience. We're in a pretty privileged position because we get to make kids happy, right? We get to see them smile. We get to give them some brightness in their day. But in order to do that in a high level, you need to understand what the viewer profile is, what they want, but at the same time, adapt our creative practices so that we can meet those needs 10x.
So that's a good segue into where I wanted to start off. And really what piqued my curiosity when I heard you speak at the Henry Stewart conference in May in New York is you started off talking about data. And I've long been a proponent of creative operations leaders need to embrace data much more wholeheartedly. Like data can be an enabler of creativity. And as I was listening to you talk, I almost thought like, oh, John is from the future. I don't know how he got here, but he's from the future because you're doing what I think all creative operations leaders and teams will eventually end up doing. I wish they were doing it 5 years ago when I started pulling my hair out, which I have none left anymore, like advocating for more use of data. So can you tell us a little bit about like, how do you actually use data as a way of fueling the creative process?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've always been a data nerd, and I've always been really interested in the why. A movie comes out, a piece of content comes out. Why is it doing so well, right? I view the creative that we build as like an asset, an appreciating asset that has a certain trajectory, right? But it's led by data. So in terms of our usage of data, it kind of all started in the beginning where I was making a bunch of content with my team and I had access to the YouTube studio. So I would spend like my nights like a nerd, just leaning in and like, wow, look at those retention points, right? Look at these rewind points. Why are some videos being watched for longer and others are not being viewed that much, right? Why are some views high and some views low? So in terms of what we've done with the data is we've created a custom platform, a dashboard for producers so that they can view particularly how the content that they've created, where it's going in terms of like, what is the retention? How many organic views has it generated, right? And you start to see within that dashboard that we've built, which also reflects our portfolio dashboard. We've got 53 YouTube channels. We create over 1,000 pieces of content a month, but we start to notice what the patterns are. And we have really inquisitive conversations. At first, it's led by data. We create things that we feel that the audience wants from an audience development perspective. We start to say, wow, you could actually see if you have a certain programming mix or a programming format, duplicative success in what's going on. So what are the common denominators utilizing our dashboard, which is powered by Domo? We could start breaking down individually what is a repeatable success and how do we duplicate it time and time again?
And is this something that you look at or your team, like your creative talent are they video producers, video editors?
Yeah.
What's what I'm trying to ask, like, do the creatives actually look at this data? Because I think for most creative operations teams or leaders that I've come across, creatives very often aren't looking at any data. They're just simply reacting to somebody saying, I need X by Y date.
And that's the problem. That's inherently the problem that I found. So I have a team of video producers, right? From stretching coast to coast from New York to LA. I was one of those producers as well coming up where I was just reacting to a brief that I was given. But I found after a while that people cannot do their best work unless they understand why they're doing what they're doing. So rather than having this one-sided conversation, as of this year, as a part of or prerequisite to our brainstorming process, we analyze as a group data together, right? We work with a great channel management team, audience development team, in addition to us, which is the creative and editorial team. And we all analyze the data together on a monthly basis, per all of our channels or per our portfolio. So I really kind of like crack that. And look, creative people are really hungry and inquisitive people for the art. But I find that there's also a creativity in the analytics. There's a creativity in seeing those bar graphs and where the views travel. So it really has become a mandate. So down to a producer who's just out of college, right? Who's manning Premiere and putting together the next SpongeBob video or Paw Patrol video. They're paying attention to the data that we're putting forth in these collective monthly conversations and sometimes weekly conversations about what is it that you're actually doing, right? When you're behind the keys and how is it generating views and watch time, which is our most important KPI, watch time.
So what you're making me think of is like creative ops leaders very often are focused on the, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Which is all about process and what technologies are we using to deliver on the what. But you and your use of data across your team, you're as you said, you're really making why the third leg of that tripod and making your team really effective. So can you share a couple of stories of like how data has really helped you as a team overall, or maybe there's some individual producers on your team where they're able to use data and really, I don't know, up level their game or their performance or the value that they're delivering to the business?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think also it's funny in deconstructing the idea of a creative person, because listen, when you make something, you want it to have an effect, right? I mean, I'm just kind of, setting the table for you really. So often you have creative people who make things and it kind of gets lost in the shuffle of, let's say, low performance. But I find creative people are incredibly passionate. And if you merge that passion with the North Star and a why, I find that the motivation that comes out of people is just ridiculous, right? I have people coming up to me, producers, who are saying, hey, I looked at the producer dashboard, look at this thing that I made and check out the story. So the story becomes the narrative that's in the creative, but the story is also the trajectory of how that video performed. There's so many great instances where, for instance, I always say SpongeBob's my boss, right? That's one of our primary channels. He's our Mickey Mouse, right? So one of my producers really smartly noticed in looking into the retention points of the video for the data that we provided, saying, oh my God, I have a really weird idea. I noticed that whenever in SpongeBob, there's a gross up of his face, the camera punches in, you see SpongeBob's imperfection. He's got crust in his eyes like he just woke up, snot in his nose. He was noticing mountains of retention points and spikes, and people were watching those videos for longer. He said, you know what? What if we were able to create an entire series of videos? We just concentrate on this one data point. We just concentrate on this one viewer behavior. And it turned out to work like wildfire, right? And that happened because a producer, not prompted by me or anybody else, was cared and was inquisitive enough to look into the data to create their own wave of success. And I have countless stories like that of folks who are just so unbelievably in love with the data. But the cool thing about it, that the data also supports what most of my folks are, which are basically fans of the show, right? It's almost like the data speaks to like the passion and love they have for the IP and the audience as well, because it's there. And you can decode what that heart share is through the data. That becomes a deeper entry point and a deeper understanding of your audience and also the IP that we love.
I love that. I really love the fact that like zooming in on snot is the data they found and they ended up, yeah, there's so much gold in data. And you're really highlighting a key point, which is I think creators very often in a world where we want to scale to infinite and move at the speed of light, and creatives are very often just tasked with do more and do it quicker, giving that context of like why and here's the impact it's having on the business. It's for any human being, they want to know that what I'm doing actually matters. How is it helping the business in this case? And I think very often creatives are like, they're just doing work, but then they're like, did that matter? Like I put in like my 8 hours today and I went home and it's just like, did that matter? Like if I didn't do that, would it have mattered? So I think that's really critical. And I think in this unfolding age of AI where we will be able to push buttons to scale to infinite and move at the speed of light, I think creatives having that use and that deeper connection, use of data and that deeper connection to why, really to the storytelling, is going to matter more than ever before to be able to break through the noise of what's actually going to resonate with the audience.
I love how you put that. And you have to care about the why. You have to either go into an office or a work hybrid or whatever the heck it is, but you have to care about what you're doing. And I think when you know the why, you actually build a better community. We put a lot of emphasis on community, on our tribe. And a lot of that is the transparency and the belief in what we're doing. We care about the results that we get, not only because we want to win and we want to dominate the space, which we have. Our portfolio is really towering right now at our latest metrics over our competition. But it's more so than winning, it's caring about what you do. And like those numbers that you see, it's also putting a human or a face behind the screen. Like we're making kids and family happy, right? It's what we do is really cool. And the data is further justifying what we believe, right? So I don't know, man. I think to a degree, I am a creative. And as a creative, I romanticize what I do a lot. And I kind of think that there is a romance in the data because it justifies what we're doing and it shows the success level that we have. And I can see on the other side of that screen, as do our people, like the kids and family who are either watching on their device, watching on their screens at home, and we're making people happy. And it's just so great to see the results of that.
So what are some of the other metrics that you're looking at as a team leader? Is it efficiency metrics or is it primarily impact metrics? Because I think a lot of creative ops leaders tend to default to how many and how quickly and how cost effectively. Or are yours really like, if you're looking at, oh, Nish is a video producer on our team, how many views did he get? How many like repeat plays did he get? Is it more of that and less of the efficiency metrics?
It's both, and both, it really goes hand in hand. We love the metrics and the results, but in order to get the metrics, we need to do an incredible amount of, we need to have an incredible amount of output. Each producer has to have a certain amount of output, and it needs to be done in an efficient way. So we really we created these verticals of importance, and it's not only as we said, the desired results, but it's how we get there. We have now, we're also in love with the process of editing as well. We love what we do. We find that we're craftspeople. And in that, we're constantly searching for what are the new efficiencies? What is Adobe coming out with that can make our job a little bit easier so that we can concentrate on the creative? And that's how we've also really implemented AI. I kind of saw this coming about 2.5 years ago, and I went along with a couple of my other team members on a tireless journey to think of how can we use AI as a tool of empowerment for our people so that they can do their jobs quicker, have a back pocket assistant so they could really live in the creative space and also absorb the metrics a little bit more. When you have somebody who's so pressured to produce a certain amount of videos, there almost becomes an analysis paralysis, right? I can't see anything ahead of me. I just have to get done what's in front of me. So the efficiency model is something that we really value. And that's how we have grown as a team so steadily. So it is massively, massively important.
So it's efficiency in the service of impact is really what you're doing.
Exactly.
Efficiency in the service of effectiveness. So let's talk a little bit about like talent. Like I said, I thought you're from the future. So I assume people on your team are a little bit from the future.
They are.
Yeah. Like what do you look for when you're hiring video producers or other creative talent onto your team?
Yeah. It's so funny. It's evolved over time. It really, really has. Initially, I kind of viewed a lot of the producers and editors who I brought on initially like folks like me. I was a writer, producer, editor, heavy emphasis on writing and editing. And the strength that I had was that I loved the content. I was always a content nerd. So initially when I was bringing people on, it was like, can you have a 20-minute conversation with me about SpongeBob? And I would find these folks who were such huge fans. They had a competency in editing, but there was like the passion for the IP. Because essentially what we do is we adopt the brains of fandoms of viewers who love this. So they become like personal Wikipedias, and that's actually how they become that can produce a ton of content. But I find that now, as we've grown as a team, what I'm looking for is passion for the IP. Are you a general fan? But also folks who are not afraid of and have a hunger for and an inquisitive nature for technology and growth as well. Case in point, there's some people on my team. I have one person sitting in my mind right now who I think is the perfect example of a producer from the future, right? Rocket ship to Mars type of guy, meaning that this is a person who can have literally a 2-hour conversation with you about Avatar: The Last Airbender, the philosophy of the show, the characters, ranking their skills, but at the same time can edit a video for you that demonstrates that, can create an Airtable of view, right? Where they're basically prioritizing what their channel needs and executing, and also has a background or is learning how to code as well and learning how to create different codes and tricks and hacks to actually make some efficiencies in video editing. So I kind of feel like it's threefold right now. You need kind of like a cyborg, right? You need your Terminator. Your Terminator, the human part of the Terminator is the person who's the fan, who has the innate love for what the IP is, who can nerd out about what these things are. But the cyborg quality, the robotic quality that they have in a good way is that they're able to blend with technology as much as possible, right? Whether it's an adaptive keystroke in Premiere that makes their job faster, or literally using now, which is insane, we literally just redid all of our servers to match our AI systems. We had to relabel a bunch of files. I asked my producer, how did you do this? I said, well, I just went on ChatGPT and got some Python code, put it into terminal into my Mac, and I was able to relabel and flatten all these files. So it's a long answer for a short question. But I think that the direction that we're going in is individuals who are fans, who are creative, but at the same time are constantly looking at the technology as well. It's a lapse of the both.
So you're making me think of a whole bunch of things here. One is we've talked about the why, and we started with data and effectiveness or impact with the audience, but now you're also making me think about like that love of IP, and you and your team deal with IP that is in the cultural mainstream, like SpongeBob and Last Airbender and a whole raft of other mainstream shows. A lot of some people listening to this, most other people listening to this, aren't going to get to say, oh, I work with like things that my kids are watching on TV or adults are watching on TV. They're focused on, we're marketing and selling a widget, we're Acme Inc. or something like that. But you're making me think of this second why. And now I'm thinking about like a why stack, like data's part of that why stack. And two is getting really curious and immersed into what does your company actually do and who do we do it for and why does it matter to them? They're like every company has that. And again, something that I've seen that's very common when I meet with creative ops teams and then the creatives, I'll often ask like, hey, who's your customer? Like, who's your like ideal customer profile and why do they care about what you guys do? And 99 times out of 100, they can't answer the question. And that's a real lack of context.
It's so startling. It reminds me, oh my God, I remember like, I always had this thing, and I had people who are close to me call me JJ, not John. And I have a lot of JJ-isms, I'm told. I have these catchphrases that I create. And one that I remember it was pre-pandemic, was like viewer profile. Because it was so frustrating to me because I used to sit into these audience performance meetings and we would look at numbers and I would be like, this is great. Like, who am I marketing this towards? Or I would sit in a marketing meeting for like a new show that's coming out, right? Or a returning show. And I was always like, wonderful. Like, who are we marketing this towards, right? If I'm selling you shoes, like, are you a Nike guy? Are you a loafer guy? Like, what do you like? What are you into? And I think even with fandom, what I've also been really interested in is it's like, okay, well, the same person who watches SpongeBob, like what else do they like? Or the same person who watches Avatar: The Last Airbender, like what else are they consuming? We're constant consumers of content. I know that I am. I'm into like 1,000 things at once. And sometimes if you break down my personality and what I like, the IP that I like relates to each other. There's certain thematics. So I think that's so massively important to like know who you're marketing towards. And actually, we had to, over the last few years, create different verticals for our content. Because like, if you're a Nickelodeon kid, you grew up on Nickelodeon, there's different eras of Nickelodeon. Like, I'm now a dinosaur in the Nickelodeon world, right? Because I was a little kid in the 90s and I watched Salute Your Shorts and all those things. There's a nostalgic audience. There's kind of like a little kid and also like kind of a bro-y stoner audience when it comes to SpongeBob. So you got to know who you're selling to, how you speak to them and what they like. It's so massively important and it's so overlooked. I mean, look, we're all selling something at the end of the day, right? You know, yeah. So if you're selling something to somebody, you're selling it to a human being. And this is why like people are so scared of AI. But I think like behind all of this stuff, I'm really ranting now. But there's a human being, there's a heart and a brain behind technology, behind the screen, right? We all are people who love certain things. You could love books. You can love, I don't know, sneakers. The fandom always exists. And if you can't break down who that person is, have a conversation with them, if they were right in front of you, then how the heck are you going to do your best in terms of your business goals or really sell to that market? So that's so massive to me. And I'm just glad you brought it up. It's something I've been passionate about from the get-go.
Yeah, it's really important to understand. Again, it all connects to like, why am I even doing this? And if you don't understand that, then you're just simply, frankly, just a cog in the system, and cogs are easily replaceable. I got a couple of other questions on talent, and I'm going to connect one of these things back to data. So What if somebody showed up who's a really talented video producer, video editor, but they've never watched an episode of SpongeBob? Could you hire them, or like would you look for something else that would tell you they could get curious about SpongeBob, even though they might not be passionate about it?
I think you had like what you just said. It's the operative words are like curious, right? Sometimes I'll meet folks who are really talented, but they're not a fan of the show. But if they're curious about things, and when you have a curious personality that's flexible and open, that's a malleable brain. That's a malleable style. I really like that. Like there's a ton of things that I'm not necessarily into, but when I talk to somebody and I like feel that level of passion and I kind of see that pattern of excitement, I get excited when people are excited. So like sometimes I've interviewed people and they come from a completely different background. I mean, I have a bunch of folks on my team who came from WWE, professional wrestling. I mean, professional wrestling, SpongeBob, Paw Patrol, those things do not really speak to each other, right? But they kind of like get into stuff, right? Honestly, it sounds so weird. I love the people who could like, if I talk to them, it's like, what are you passionate about? They tell me about mountain biking and we get lost in a hole for 20 minutes. There's something about that where like you can get lost in something in a good way, right? It speaks to me about that you're a person who's passionate. You're a person who's like curious about how things work. And I think that for me is of the utmost importance, curious personalities. And the Venn diagram is also that curiosity also extends, I find, into processes, right? It extends into having honest conversations about where we're inefficient. It extends into conversations about how can we use AI not in a scary way to make things better? Like it's just those folks who like, I just picture it like that's the dude or the gal you go to a bar with and just talk about shit. You can just get lost for hours and the bar closes and people have stopped talking, but you're still in there working things out. There's just something about curious people that like, when I talk to somebody who has a pure inquisitive nature, it lights me the heck up. It really, really does.
I like that because as you're talking, I'm almost thinking like in my interviews now, it's everybody always like goes, "Are you curious?" Which is not a great question because it invites a pretty superficial response, which is, yes, I'm curious. Like every human being says, of course I'm curious, because I think every human being is curious. But I think the key thing is you're highlighting is, can they get you interested and excited about something they're passionate about, right? Like, even though 100%. I don't care about mountain biking and you might decide to cut this interview off now. I've never watched an episode of SpongeBob.
How dare you? How dare you?
But I'm going to guess, like, if you and I started to get into a conversation about it, you're going to get me curious about it and sort of hyped up for those 20 or 25 minutes. And I think that's a true sign of like somebody who's passionate, curious, engaged, if they can make that infectious for those that are around them.
And isn't that also one of the principles of selling something, right? I mean, we're not just catering to existing SpongeBob fans, we're creating fans as well, right? We're having an experience where, like, let's say somebody's older sister is a SpongeBob fan and their little brother or little sister comes into the room like, what are you watching? And they're getting psyched with that other person's passion is about. So passion is infectious and it opens the corridor of interest, whether we're selling IP or whether we're selling, I don't know, like a new brand of hoodie or something like that. That's the basis, I think, of selling anything or getting results. It's interest. It's people caring about stuff.
Yeah, it's really, it's human nature, right? It's we are attracted to, and we end up spending our time and dollars with those things that get us excited. So sticking on talent for a second, and I want to go back to data, like you hire people that are coming from other organizations or it's a new graduate. And again, most organizations don't really have a strong use of data. They don't have a lot of the focus on the why. So when somebody new comes into your organization, like data might be a foreign concept to them. It might be a little bit intimidating. Talk us through a little bit about like, how do you introduce that to them? Like, how do you make it friendly for them? And then I'm also curious to learn, like, has data almost become gamified? Like, do you have video producers comparing their dashboards and performance and things like that? And have you created sort of like an internal video game?
Yeah. It actually has become really fun because the way that I looked at the data and when we created this producer dashboard, it's like imagine if you're like, I don't know, like if you're a sports guy, like what are like LeBron's stats, right? What are like Messi's stats? So the cool thing about the dashboard that we created is that it literally has a breakdown of like your most popular videos of the month, your most popular videos of all time, the subscribers that you generated, right? You know, the amount of organic watch time, the organic views. So look, at the end of the day, I think especially if you're a video producer, you're a creative person, there's a little bit of that competitive nature in you where like you either want to best your teammate or best yourself. And it's cool to get results. I find that like if you're in a meeting and you call out an amazing thing that somebody has done, take pride in that. You care about what the heck that you do. So it has become kind of a fun thing for people to go in and see what their stats are. And like sometimes I'll notice, I'm not going to pick on anybody by name, but we'll have a data meeting and you've got somebody maybe a little lean and green and they're kind of like they're kind of just chilling. Their eyes are down. They're kind of slacking at during a meeting, but you're like, hey, so-and-so, I'm going to pull up your stats right now. Check this out. This video that you did this like 6 months ago. Geez, look at the results of it now. There's a hunger for that. It's like, oh my God, I actually did that. I affected that change. And it actually makes people believe like the why. It's like, I hate this idea. And I've always put in this position so much in my career where like, all right, I'm just like an instrument of success for somebody else, for something I could barely give a shit about. Right. But the fact that like, I tell producers like, you did this, like, look at this shit. You crushed this. This is because of you. This is because of you. So, you know, when you could affect change, that's a powerful thing. So even somebody who's out of school was in their comm program, right? They were kind of in their little film club making their student videos. When you kind of bring them into a room like this and you're like, dude, you've driven like tens of thousands of subscribers. Like you actually made somebody stop what they're doing and hit a button. Like you affected a behavior in somebody. It's a powerful thing to understand the why. So I think when you gamify it that way, or you just like, you're big upping what people do, it's like success begets success in an individual. The feeling of like, man, I did something crazy awesome. You want to do it again. You want to duplicate that. And then you start building a community of people who are like, let's all take this thing to the highest place that we can. It's building belief, and belief is an incredibly strong tool. And when you're just taking creative people, you're not just creating in a vacuum. You're creating with a purpose and with a good mission and a goal and a direction. I found that it's a really powerful thing. And I think for creative leaders, you have to like, if you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk as well. You have to love this stuff and you have to be passionate about it because how you act and the passion that you have can be infectious. It really, really can. I can't tell you now. I mean, I've got folks who are coming up to me with data all the time. Hey, can I get 5 minutes of your time? Check this out. Check that out. Check this out. Check that out. And I think if you want to be in this game, whether you work for a legacy media company or a B2B business, you need to be a creator and you need to understand the things that you're creating, where they are going. These are all assets. They're traveling somewhere, right? So I give you, again, I give long answers for short questions. I think as you can probably tell by now. But it definitely has become a fun process to see the metamorphosis between somebody who just has blinders on making to now opening up their aperture that like, hey, there's a whole world around you. Look left, look right. Because what you're making is traveling somewhere.
So first of all, I love the long answers. That's why we do this podcast is unlike at conferences, we don't have to rip through everything in 20 minutes and leave everyone wanting for more. I'm loving how you're tying data to belief, right? Because data very often is sort of seen as something that is sterile, as like just very like Mr. Spock-like, if you will. But you're tying it to belief, and it's a belief in that the work I'm doing is having an impact. And then it's reinforcing belief in my own talent that as a creative. Oh, look at what I did and look at how it moved the needle. Or hey, I'm sure you've got some people on the team that sometimes like what they're doing isn't hitting the mark. So it's then belief in, I now understand like I need to change something instead of like it being like arbitrary of like, I don't know if I'm doing good or not good. I clearly know I am. And John and my team have belief in me. So I'm going to figure out what I need to fix and what I need to improve to deliver the results that are expected, or that other people on my team are delivering because it's a benchmark. I love the sports analogy as well. I'm almost thinking like you should create like baseball cards for everybody on your team. maybe a screenshot of their favorite video that they've made on the front, and on the back are like their key stats from the past year or something like that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I love collecting cards when I was a kid and reading the back of them and really understanding like, oh, how many at-bats did he have and what was his average and things like that. I think
that would be like an amazing like end of year holiday gift. I mean, that would be like insane.
I think it would be. I think everybody would love to have their own baseball card, right? Who wouldn't? And then you're also making me think about like how competitive does it get amongst your team? Like, are they looking at each other's stats and going like, oh, like, am I going to be looking at Bob's and Susan's stats and going like, oh, okay, like I need to pull up my socks here.
It's funny. I happen to think that there is some of that. I don't think folks are going to vocalize that at the outright, but I do think that there's, in any creative team, there's like looking at other people's work. Like you're taking a test and let me look at your amp. Let me look at this. Let me look at that. There's an inquisitive nature. But I have to admit, though, I've been really lucky and blessed I think part of it is me sourcing the talent, finding the folks that we just blend with naturally. But there's a serendipitous component that I've just found people who are just good natured people. There's just a great community, and that they're, in addition to the stuff that I put into place, they're helping each other a lot too. We've fallen off a little bit since it's the summertime. A lot of folks are enjoying their vacation, but training sessions as well. So somebody has an awesome thing that they learned, a new plugin, a new AI component that can be added here or there. They're like, we're doing sessions on it, monthly sessions, right? Where we're teaching each other. So the idea that the community that we built, it's based in belief, it's based in fandom. And it's kind of like we all want to win together, which is cool. But that competitive nature, I mean, look, again, nobody's going to say it outright, but I think it exists there. I mean, I know that I had it, especially when I was a producer coming up, or I wanted to get the awesome project. I wanted to crack ground on some new thing.
Well, you're making me think about baseball again, because I think the right sort of culture is having that healthy balance of collaboration and competition. Like everybody on the ball team, they all want to hit the game-winning home run, or they want more RBIs by the end of the season, but they understand like their success is also dependent on other people on the team. So if you get that balance right of collaboration and competition within a team, then like that's a championship team. It's hard to do, but once you get that, like that's championship caliber.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. And when what we've done with the producer dashboards in our meetings, when you call people out in that recognition as well, that's a really positive affirmation from people. You know what I mean? It's that round of applause. It's that damn. It's the looking at what that person did in a public forum. And I find that people really do love that as well. I do. Everybody does.
Yeah, it is. And so one final question about like data before we move on to operations and processes. Does this come up at the end of the year or in performance reviews? Like, hey, Nish, you drove X number of subscribers and things like that. Is it that sort of like direct line of sight between my effort, my impact, my performance review?
It's funny enough. There's a senior producer that I have who serendipitously started to implement that for his reports. The way that we organize things is that there's different verticals, right? Per IP, per concentration between, let's say, live action or animated content. And one producer started to do that, but he did it in a really insane way where he was gathering all the information from YouTube itself. The motivation for me to put data in place is that we need to be very focused on our metrics and goals, right? So it wasn't directly performance related, because I think the one pitfall of that is that it's that one time of year or that twice a year where you're just concentrating on you and your performance review. I think it's more about the 360 of the year, right? You should always be looking at these things. It should always motivate you, and we should be discussing them in a group. So you're taking it out of the cog of like, all right, so my performance review, what did I do? Or rather the manager saying, let me hype this person up to continue success. I want you to be thinking about data like constantly, right? That's what it should be. I mean, one of the channel managers or the head of the channel management team is like, I have coffee in the morning and I'm looking at data, right? I'm starting my day with that. I'm getting my brain in check. So I think for me, it was a reaction to the growing demands that we have, right? We have a programming mix that we put in place that's really aggressive, that relies a lot on longer videos, right? And in order to make that massive change, I needed my folks and myself to have the why, the belief in what's going on. So merging what our goals are for the year with that data really helped performance and motivation for continuing what we're doing. And the great thing is, if you look at our performance from the past few months, we've had a steady rise in terms of what our success has been. So again, I think it should be something that's ingrained in you. It shouldn't be just left for a certain time of year, because if you have that type of cadence, you only care about it when those things are coming up, right? I want it to be a part of what you live and breathe all the time.
Yeah. And you're highlighting another great use of like having data as part of your culture. Is it isn't a point in time. It is a constant, continuous thing. Like people are aware day to day, how are they performing or not performing? And then they don't find themselves like when performance reviews coming up going like, oh my God, now I have to justify what I'm doing here. You already know that every day of the week.
Yeah, it becomes a fear-based measure. It becomes, oh my God, this thing is happening, so let me be as productive as I can. Or it becomes for the manager like, well, let me try to have this be a positive conversation. Or it almost becomes a little gimmicky, like I'm just going to utilize it for now. It's like, it's the difference between, creating a habit or just having a moment.
So I'm going to jump ahead to something that I was going to save till a little bit later. Maybe we'll come back to operations and process, time permitting. A term is sort of coming to my mind as we're talking, data-informed or data-driven creativity. And I think that might be a term. Let's go with data-informed creativity. That might be a term that a lot of creatives go, no, that is, data should not inform creativity. But you are doing that on your team, and you've given some great examples of that. And as we've talked about, we're moving into this age of AI, where we're going to be able to train models on scaling the content of yesterday and today to infinite and doing it at the quote unquote push of a button. So how do you think about like AI and its ability to generate more content and do it at speed? And what is creativity in this unfolding age? Because I think you already do data-driven creativity. It's having a huge impact on the business, but we're about to move into a new era of that. So like, how are you thinking about that? What do you think some of the natural fears and concerns are going to be with that? And I don't think anyone has the answers here. Nobody does. So this is really let's just sort of spitball this.
Yeah, it's so crazy because we have implemented, or we are going through now, an aggressive rollout of a particular AI system that we've created in-house. And when I initially was getting the ball rolling, I cannot tell you the amount of fear and trepidation I've had from folks. I received an email at one point that was a dystopian vision, right? It was kind of like Blade Runner meets a natural disaster movie and Terminator about what's going to happen. I had other folks just clearly concerned about their jobs being taken away, things like that. And they're all valid concerns, right? Because we don't know what the future is going to bring with this per se. And that fear of the unknown creates a ton of anxiety. But the way that I was looking at it is like, well, with any innovation that has happened, listen, I remember I started off in college news and I was cutting tape to tape, and that sucks. I was like, geez, man, I wish I could just get my thing done faster. I can't even concentrate on my story and my facts because I'm trying to get this thing out. Then all of a sudden we went to digital editing. It was a lot better, right? So what I told my folks, when we had our own kind of closed door town hall, is that imagine having an assistant, right? I'd love to have an assistant. I would love for somebody to take care of some of what I feel the sticky points of creativity that don't allow me to make something, right? Even coming up as an editor, I found that, man, I wish I had more time to just concentrate on what this concept is or to understand what I'm doing. So the way that I always likened it to is like, imagine having a back pocket assistant, doing more with less, which is always what we're pushed up against the wall with creative operations. So you can actually concentrate on what you're doing. And with our system rolling out now, and we're getting some really positive results, and pretty soon my goal is between the end of this year and into mid next is to have this AI system operate at 100% of our team, right? And it's for a couple of different purposes. So we could hit volume, but more importantly, so that the individual has more bandwidth to think, right? I can't tell you, like, I'm going off now, but when I was a producer coming up, I loved when my back wasn't up against the wall in terms of gathering media, balancing a budget, doing all of these other operational things. I love to just sit and think about what I was doing. and to really sit and be like, okay, what the heck am I doing? What's happening right now? What can I pour into this to make it different? What can I pour into it to make it better? So I think that these generative tools that are coming about in a positive sense will allow people to be more free thinkers. But you think Terminator, that it's the opposite, right? That there'll be some sort of indentured servitude that we'll have towards technology. But I think it'll allow people to really think about what they're doing, because my North Star is always the why. And I think even if you're a maker and you feel like you're not making calling the shots, you're not the shot caller in the department, I want you to feel that way though. You are a shot caller, right? Think about what you're doing. So for instance, if I'm thinking about what my assignments are for the month and I have to make X amount of videos, I can say, well, I got this technology that could get me there faster. Let me think about what I'm actually doing. What are the micro decisions that I can make that'll be the difference between success or failure, right? Or it will be that upwards percentage points of taking this to the next level. So I love that idea of freedom, of time, of slowing the clock, of thinking about what I'm doing very methodically, right? Because so many people are, especially in creative operations from a video department, it just kind of feels like the I Love Lucy episode where you're just trying to put everything together, right? I want you to stop the clock, think, and really be methodical about what you're doing. Fall in love with what you're doing. So that's what I think AI offers. Naturally, I do think as time goes on, you got to have rules of the road. There's ethical concerns that are happening, but I'm always thinking in terms of the betterment of the individual, the creative.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. So you're making me think about like three things that I've talked to a lot of organizations about. One is, I do this bit around let machines so humans can once again human, right? I think a lot of the work we do today as creatives or non-creatives is machine-like work because we've productized so much of our work. And it's rote work, like step by step. And then people go, oh, I can actually write documentation so that if I got hit by a bus, somebody else could do it, which is basically a precursor to an algorithm getting trained on doing that work. And to your point, a lot of that is soul-sucking work. If it's rote work, like humans aren't good at rote work because we're constantly in search of novelty and curiosity. And then two is, I love what you're saying about the why, because like the second presentation I often do is like tasking, thinking, and transforming with AI is we should be embracing AI to get rid of that tasking work so that I can do more with less. So as you said, I can free up that time to like think, to really consider like what's the best way to get to the results. There's a whole bunch of options that maybe AI has given me, but it's up to me to do that. And I think that's especially true and important in the creative world, because I think AI is good at scaling and speeding up the creative of yesterday and today, and really the average creative of yesterday and today. It's great at doing that, but it's humans who create the stories of tomorrow, who create who can break through that noise to resonate and land with the audience. So I think it's counterintuitive to say it, but I think we're both saying the same thing, is like AI is actually the best thing that happened to, and here's where I might get into trouble with the audience, to real creatives. I think there's a lot of creatives today who are technicians. They're really good at the tool and using it, but they're not storytellers. And I think we're going to have a world where there's two types of creatives: the technical creatives who can scale and automate and do those things. And that's valuable. It's not in any way taking away from them. And then there's the creators who are the storytellers who look at the blank canvas and stare at it for hours. And as you said, just think. And then, some way, somehow an epiphany comes to them, but they've had the mind space to do that.
I love what you're saying. And I think for us, where we are as a department and as a team right now, is that we're kind of like creating and building at a cross section of the both, right? We have a lot of demands on a monthly basis we have kind of two types of creative. There's ones that are like longer videos that are a little bit paint by numbers. But the idea right now is, can we secure that scale? Can we be inquisitive about building that scale, but at the same time build these experimental labs to try new things? I can say this because it's been released. Like we've done what we've done so well in terms of those necessary mandatory videos, right? That hit that dopamine button in our fans. And we've created an experimental lab to try new animation. We just created a series for SpongeBob's 25th anniversary where one of our, actually a motion designer in combination with producers pitched an idea of there's this niche character in SpongeBob called Doodle Bob. He's literally like a pencil drawn character with crude lines. What if we discovered what his life is like in a series of animations? So there's kind of like the cross section of our team, which is fascinating with innovation, looking at that blank canvas, coming up with weird and strange ideas, but also knowing what we need to move as an audience to remain successful. So we kind of have a pipeline for both. And admittedly, my ambition is to do more of that creative space via creating bandwidth for the necessary output that we need to have. I want more weird ideas. I want more experimentation. And I kind of feel like for a creative person, maybe it's necessary to be both. It's necessary to be the technician, and it's also necessary to be the dreamer, right? I think having a fundamental understanding of both those things are just going to make for, I don't know, more powerful, more informed creatives. And that's the way that I came up. I always describe myself as I'm one of the most non-precious creatives that you can meet, because I was always creating as these promo campaigns. I got to remember, I was in 1515 Broadway in a dark room, dreaming up of all these crazy ideas to promote a new show. And I would pour my heart into it, but I was always interested in how am I doing that? What is the structure, the sandbox that's been created that allows me to do my best work? And then how do I scale that? So I think it's important, because what I don't like, and this is, I'm going to say a controversial thing that people aren't going to like, but I think when you're being creative, but it's too much of a film club, right? Where you have a closed audience of people and you guys are all patting each other on the back. We're like, you did an amazing thing. You made an amazing thing. Great. But know the platform or medium that's going to, and recognize how that's going to be seen by the most people. I mean, listen, if you want to flick the middle finger and say that I want to create what I want to create, beautiful. But if you really want to affect change and create a ripple in that pond that goes out to an audience, and you get feedback back that allows you to be a better creative, I think you need to be the technician. You need to be data focused and hungry. You need to be the artist, and you need to be the fan. You have to kind of be all things at once, which for some folks, it's very difficult, but then it kind of goes back into that curiosity as a person, right? If you're so stuck with one thing, you're limiting your curiosity. You're limiting the amount of options and output that you have. I mean, look at me, case in point. I started off as a branding guy that dabbled in digital video, and then it's grown from there. When I was initially a promo guy and started on my digital department, I was just creating in my own vacuum. I was like slinging the spaghetti against the wall of what I thought was cool. But then it got to a certain point where it's like, I thought to myself, it's so one-sided. Like, what am I doing? The why has always been really important to me. Like, why am I doing this? And why is somebody deciding to watch this? That you become inquisitive about people. You become inquisitive about the other person behind the screen. So I kind of feel like you need to, in a certain sense, be adaptive in your own thought pattern and process to be open to not only creativity, the why, and the data that supports it. It all kind of blends together. Like, I'm almost kind of feel like I'm looking at, I don't know, like stars connected in the sky or something like that, where it's not just one thing, it's a series of things that are all tied together that create this beautiful mosaic.
Well, what you're making me think of is, so one, I agree with you. There are certain creatives in the world who will just create for the sake of creating, right? Because it's something that's in them and they need to see it exist. Like, I'm a huge fan of Prince, the musician, and people used to say about him, like,
cool.
He just has music in him, and it just needs to come out of him. And he doesn't care if people are listening to it or not, right? It just needs to come out of him. But like, that's Prince, that's Mozart, that's a handful of other people that are remembered throughout the ages. I think creativity for the rest of us, and I think every human on the planet is creative. What you're making me think of is that creativity is a conversation. It is I was going to say ecosystem, but it's like, you're making me think about, like, it's a conversation with an audience or a desired audience of like, I'm putting this out there. What do you think about it? And sometimes you're getting that one-to-one feedback, or you're looking at data across like thousands or millions of viewers, like your team is. And creativity isn't something that just exists in a bubble. It's just something that's in my head that needs to come out, and people should accept it the way it is. Again, Prince and Mozart could do that. Creativity for most of us is a conversation, and we want it to have an impact, because the most human thing in the world is to be creative. It is to be a storyteller. It is to help shape like perspectives and opinions and drive action. So it's a conversation.
I love that. I really, really do. I think for me, what I get the biggest buzz about is the energy that I receive off of an audience or people, right? I kind of feel like there is a medium of creativity. Like, listen, it would be great to be like the princes of the world, right? They're operating from a very single space and emanating that art because it exists within their DNA strands. But there's other form of artistry that it's like a tennis match where I volley to you, you volley to me. I'm reacting to you, react to me. And there's something cool about that because it doesn't operate in a single wavelength. It's going up and it's going down. And there's something cool about that. I'm a big fan. I'm going to nerd out a little bit. I love jujitsu, right? So I train jujitsu a lot. I've been doing it off and on. I've gotten to it really, really heavy in probably the past year or so again. And what I love about jujitsu is that I'm reacting, you're reacting. I do something different, you do something different. There's a constant conversation that's happening even in the physical movements of what's happening, where I'm reading the information and I'm adapting to it and changing. But it's all happening within the confines of a structure. So it's a language, jujitsu, it's a physical language. But when you talk to me a certain way, if you ask me a question, I'm going to respond a certain way. And I kind of feel like that for me is really creative operations, right? That really is creativity, is that we have a certain box and parameters, right? We have a million different tools within those boxes, but I could take a tool and I can move this way, move that way, have this motion or have that motion. So that's what I love the most. And honestly, that's probably one of the most gratifying parts of my job is not only the effect that we have on the audience, but it's also the conversations and the volley that I have with creative people on a day-to-day basis, right? Where people can blow my mind with a concept I wasn't thinking of, or they can affect one thought that I had that creates another DNA strand of something else. It's kind of like an ever-evolving garden. It is an ecosystem because it's like the ecosystem is reacting to the things that you're putting into it. So that's something that I find to be, utterly fascinating.
Yeah, that's very cool. So as we're sort of coming into the stretch here, I do want to go back to the operations part of it. Because again, I think you're John from the future. Your team is from the future. And the big reason is the way you use data. So I'm curious how you sort of look at the operation side of the equation. We've talked a lot about the creative side. How do you look at the operation side in terms of processes and things like that? Like, are there signals you're looking for to go, okay, we need to, well, one, let me step back for a second and go, like, do you have a lot of codified processes, or is the process basically, we know what we need to achieve for the business and let's achieve that and let's keep improving on that? Is that the process full stop? And then the video producers sort of like figure out their own, like, how are we going to do the work? Or do you have codified processes? And if you do, how do you sort of monitor the health of those processes? Because I think processes quickly get sort of ossified.
Oh, man. We are big process people. I am. And over the past few years, it's amazing where we've evolved. And initially, when I was dropped into the job that I was in, it was me, a couple of other people, and we were just given a big box of like demands. Like, this is what you need to do. There was no process whatsoever. So we've all built a very strong process and we thrive in it. But it's something like a garden that you constantly need to mend to. There's weeds that grow. There's animals that come and steal your vegetables, right? We constantly need to look at it. So the process is baked in technology and data, and that we have a central nervous system of operations, which is Airtable. We all love Airtable. Airtable connects to all the different lines of business. We have an audience development team. We have a growth and operations team. We're a creative team and a channel management team. But how that goes down to my department is, which has helped me, is within the process that we have, we know our goals, but to have a decentralized command to knowing that those goals are made up of a bunch of different verticals. For instance, I have an editorial lead on the preschool side, who then has a battalion of folks who, per preschool brands, they're experts in Paw Patrol. They're experts in Blaze. The same thing for animation. So I have my decentralized command in terms of everybody knows holistically where we're trying to go, right? But then they have their particular areas of interest that represents a different leg of the table. So I have my animation team. My animation team is living and breathing animation. They're studying the data that we're giving them in terms of what the audience likes. And we're also following a programming mix that unites all of us. The programming mix says, hey, no matter what the IP is, this is generally the TRT and the types of videos that people are reacting to. So we're setting the box with a process in terms of what our programming is, what our departments are, what our team of specialists are. And then we're all gathering and communicating in terms of where the information is centrally held in Airtable. So, and in terms of the process being mended to, I find that more often than not, what we constantly need to adapt is how we communicate with each other. Because the thing that we suffer from is that there's so many things happening with 53 global and domestic YouTube channels, over 1,000 videos a month, that conversations are lost. So that's the one thing that I constantly have to mend to, in terms of clear lines of communication always.
So your Airtable, and I think Airtable is a great product, and I assume you've got like a few people that are constantly managing that system for you because you're a large organization. But it almost sounds like Airtable's been set up in a way to represent the org chart or the business. And again, what you're overlaying on top of that is the data of where we want to get to and the data of like where we are. And then if we take that a level deeper in terms of like how people are communicating with each other, like moving something from like, if we pictured it as a Kanban board from the first column to the second column to the third column, is that done? Is that also codified in Airtable, or is it more like, hey, here's a whole view of the business. So you've got context. Here's your part of the business, like your leg, as you said, you're doing animation. And here's the data that you need to, that we're sort of going to hold you to. And here's where you're at. But how you do it, like the in the weeds process, like the individual teams figure that out.
Yeah, it really is the latter, right? When we're setting the table in terms of like goals, data, specialty, different battalions, right? And the different battalions have a very clear set of sub goals that are put there, right? So your particular channels, we're trying to reach this metric, right? Every single month or higher than that. How do we get there? Here's a blueprint for how we can do it based on the data. If you generate X amount of videos, these types of formats and these lengths, that seems like a repeatable form of success. Now, how do you play jazz within that as well? So we set up a very tight parameters and a clear sandbox for individuals who are people leaders, who are also producers and junior members who support that. But we also give them the idea, or rather the latitude, to speak to each other, have their own conversations, and to make their own decisions within those setups, right? Because for me as a creative leader, there's no way possible that I can be gleaned into the micro decisions that are happening on a daily basis. So we have to build the clear why within those battalions that are supporting the overall goals. So it really is that. It's having that North Star, or I always say the why. Having a clear understanding of the why, and then generating those sub whys amongst the big why.
So this is why you're John from the future, because I think I for a while had this sort of like metaphor that there's a lot of creative operations leaders that are operating at the 1,000 or 10,000 foot level, which is basically day-to-day project management, firefighting, things like that, where they're in the weeds of like managing the process, like how stuff is getting done. You are operating at the 100,000 foot level, which is setting that context and giving people the data to understand like what do they need to deliver and how are they doing against that. And then those individual teams and the people on those teams figure out how do we sort of work in the weeds to deliver what we need to deliver, because they've got the context now. But how it gets done really should be determined by the frontline people. And I think way too many creative ops leaders, the majority of their time is like wrapped up in documentation and things like that. I'm going to guess there's conversations going on across your teams or battalions, as you call them, where they're going, okay, we're not on track to deliver what we need to by the end of the month or quarter or whatever it might be. What's the issue? Is it a process issue? Is it we need more resources? And then if they need more resources, the conversation they're coming to you with is not, hey, John, we need more people. It's, if we had more people, here's what we would be able to deliver and move the needle on this business KPI that the organization cares about, which is a much more productive discussion. You still may have to say no because of budget reasons, but it's now grounded in what do we actually care about? Like, why does this matter? And so I love that. And again, that's why you're John from the future, in my opinion.
No, you're 100% right. When you localize the problem within these groups and the why is so clear, you can really have surgical conversations. It can be a resource conversation. It could be a conversation about, for instance, we have some teams where the interesting thing about our department is that we weigh what the audience wants, and sometimes we have marketing needs that come in, right? There's a new movie coming out. There's a new product that we have to promote. So does that take away from the cadence that we have? Does that take away from the environment that we built for the user? So it's great because you have these localized conversations. And it's also the trust that you have in your individuals as well. And that's where the why and the belief comes in. If you know why you're here, you know where you're going, you believe in what the mission is, you can have some really structured conversations, especially when problems come up. And we find more often than not, we're able to solve those problems a lot quicker because we're not sparring with so many foes. We're just being uniquely tied into what the problem is and what the solutions may be.
Yeah, and my opinion over time has become that highly regimented processes, which might make sense in like regulated industries like financial services or healthcare and things like that. But for most organizations, highly regimented processes just get in the way because a regimented process is something that makes sense on paper or on the whiteboard or on a PowerPoint slide. But when it makes contact with reality, 9 times out of 10, the process cannot be adhered to because there's a whole bunch of X factors and unknowns that tend to happen, just like real life. So I think giving your teams that context of the why and the what, and then letting them figure out the how. And I assume there's probably some basic like minimum viable process in terms of like this sort of data has to be inputted or collected as work is being done and things like that. But I think that's a much better way of doing it versus micromanaging the process and like regimenting it.
I hate micromanagement. I really, really do. I really think that is kind of one of the dark horsemen or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to a department. And that's where the jazz comes in terms of people understanding the why, understanding the structure of things, and being able to improvise on what the solutions are. It really is a beautiful thing to see somebody who comes to me and they have a perceived problem. And then during the conversation, I see them work it out because they know what the why is. They understand what the why is. And even for managers, you're micromanaging like that, you're unable to look at the bigger picture. And people who are leading a creative department, you need to constantly be in your script and writing the other scripts. You need to be in the present and in the future at the same time, at least that I find that. So how can you do that effectively when you're constantly embattled or micromanaging things? And it all comes again with building that strong belief in that inquisitive nature. I mean, there was an interesting thing that happened at the beginning of the year. Probably one of the toughest times that I had was last year. We were adapting to the ever-changing landscape of YouTube, right? YouTube is rewarding different channels, right? And creators who are creating more videos, but longer, right? Longer videos. So we adapted a new programming mix that was very aggressive based on data. We followed the data and we saw where it was going, but it required more work from folks. It required folks to make longer videos to stretch things out. And I remember when we had a discussion about that because we were doing things a certain way for so long and we had success. When I dropped that little bit of chaos into the environment, things started to unravel a little bit, right? Folks were getting very nervous. Folks were getting really distressed about things. But we fell back into the why, right? When we stopped and I painted for them, okay, why are we actually doing this, right? We're saying we want to make longer videos. What is the impetus for this? And then we broke down in particular about what YouTube is rewarding, talking about how YouTube is a business and wants people to stay on the platform for longer, right? Talking about circular traffic, that other videos are being served up because of this. Talking about the user experience. How gratifying is it if you love what you love, you're watching it for longer, you're staying with it, you're having a deeper connection with the content. And we found the why and the logical reason for why these things were happening. Then we were being solutions based. Then we were setting up this battalion and saying, okay, so this is the mountain that we want to climb. What are the different ways that we can get there, right? And a lot of it was through technology as well, through simplifying creative, right? Through decluttering some of our process. So I found that once we understood, or my folks understood, the general mission and the roots behind the mission, then I started to notice some really interesting problem solving where I wasn't dictating the solutions. I was listening to the solutions. We were building them together. We had the music amongst each other to be like, what do you think about this? Well, this could be cool too. Well, let's try this solution. Let's stress test this. Oh, wow, this is great. So that why is just, it's so important. It's so important to build that belief, because you're not going to get the best work out of your people. And you need your people to be problem solvers as well. You cannot just have a group of yes people who are just saying, okay, yes, they need to intrinsically understand the mission and the why. And that's how great progress is made. That's how we get to the future. That's how we think of solutions, whether it's technology or data. So that was a really trying time, but fortunately we adapted that. And to add more chaos on top of things, we learned that last year that we also needed to adapt our videos globally. And that was a whole new process. Imagine taking one asset times 15 and localizing it to the language in that territory. So again, what is the apprehension reliever oftentimes, understanding intrinsically, why the hell am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah, and it makes change so much easier, which is a whole separate conversation around we overcomplicate change. And I think not knowing the why is one of the, if not the primary reason that change is way too cumbersome and chaotic in most organizations. So wrapping up here, it's been a great conversation. And
yeah, man, thank you. Thank you.
Already looking forward to a part 2. But I've kept calling you John from the future throughout this episode. As you think about yourself, your own career, and what creative operations needs to evolve into from here, what are you thinking about in terms of your own creative operations future, or your team's creative operations future over the next 1, 2, 3 years?
Yeah, there's a couple of different areas that I'm really leaning into. And a lot of it is based off of how can we further utilize AI to scale, to continue to scale, but also with that new time that we have, how are we creating new formats that really connect with the audience? So if you're thinking of the future, right? I'm always thinking of like, okay, if we have settled the ship and we're getting great results in terms of our YouTube videos, are there other platforms? Are there other formats that are going to emerge in the future that we should be leaning into? For instance, like YouTube Shorts has become a fountain for us of creativity, of experimentation. And it's the exact opposite of what our money-making assets are, which are longer videos. So what I'm looking into now is really vertical video and short form storytelling and what that can be, right? Whether it's through animation, whether it's through a different cutting perspective, or rather, I don't know. For me, it represents a whole new discipline that's going to remain here for a long time. So I'm really leaning into that right now, and I'm very excited about it. I mean, we're having actually tomorrow in office what we have called a shorts-a-thon. So in order to have these things to engage our team, we have basically like a film festival that we're creating where you have X amount of time to create a really wild and weird format. So it's almost like I'm kind of, in a positive way, I'll say regressing from the kind of data formats that I'm into, right, into the performance metrics. And like, I'm kind of building spaces now for like a little bit of wild play. So I think that's what I'm looking into. So maybe I've gone to the future and now I'm kind of going back to my primitive Stone Age, right, where I just want to play a little bit. So, and I'm just looking at the relation between the both of those things.
I think it's a continuous cycle, right? Through this episode, as we've talked about AI a little bit, you've talked about how you're going to use it to free up time. And now people are going to be able to do more of this blank canvas thinking and creating. And I think that's exactly the right way of approaching AI right now, because nobody has the answers. Like literally nobody has the answers, not even Sam Altman, as to how all this is going to play out and what our role as humans in general or creative professionals is going to be as we transition through this. All we know is that if history has taught us nothing else, is what we are best at is creating tomorrow. That is the single best thing that human beings do. And I think that's especially true of creatives. It's like, okay, we've got all the stories of yesterday and today. What are the stories and the formats and the different forms of creative expression of tomorrow? And I love this idea of like doing taking the hackathon approach and just letting people go wild. There is no data. There is no, the why is let's figure out what's next. And that's it.
Exactly.
It's experimentation for the pursuit of figuring out what tomorrow is. And there is no manual, there is no data, there is no optimized for that. It's just trying.
And that's why I think it's important for creative leaders as you're building your department is that you can be really regimented, right? You can be very goals focused. But for the use of AI that we're talking about, for the use of having clean data to create repeatable success is building those shelves. It's like Wayne Corp from Batman, right? In the basement, all the cool stuff goes down, right? Where you have all these experimental weird things. So I think I think as people, generally speaking, there's multiple different sides of us, right? There's sides of us that desire regimentation. There's sides of us that desire results. But there's also a side to us that desires no rules whatsoever and complete free form play. And I think when you have those things that are constantly playing with each other and you're accessing those different parts of your personality, you really get an incredibly sophisticated creative person. So that's what it really is. It's a blend of all those things. It's a tapestry of all those things together.
Yeah. Well, John, that's a good note to end on. Thanks so much for doing this today. I know
of course.
It's been incredibly valuable for me. You've got me thinking about so many things, and I know it's going to be very valuable to the audience. So I think I'm going to get lots of DMs saying, when are you getting John back? Because I've got
that's awesome.
questions I want you to ask him. So thanks
well,
so much for
I'm happy to be back, and thank you for having this format to talk about this. Not enough people have these conversations, and you're really doing incredible work by creating a format where we can volley back and forth like this with ideas. So thank you, my friend. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that.